A man lost in the solitude of the mountains tries to escape the pain of losing his wife. His routine changes when he finds a pregnant bear near death and on an impulse decides to save her life. As the cubs are born, he devotes himself to protecting them, forming a deep connection with nature. But hunters and societal pressures will force him to make impossible choices with irreversible consequences. Snow fell silently on the roof of the small wooden cabin as Michael gazed out the foggy window at the horizon, lost among the snow-capped peaks. Winter had arrived more harshly that year, bringing with it a cold that penetrated not only through the gaps in the old boards, but primarily through the loneliness that had inhabited his heart for exactly 6 months. The steaming cup of coffee in his hands was already half empty when the first rays of sun began to tinge the sky with shades of orange. It was another solitary dawn in the mountains, where every minute seemed to drag on with the same slowness as the snowflakes dancing in the frigid air. Michael no longer cared about counting the days. They had become merely invisible marks on a calendar that had lost all meaning since Sarah had left. The interior of the cabin held memories of a shared life. On the wooden walls still hung the photographs that Sarah loved so much, frozen moments of smiles, hugs, and promises of a future that now seemed so distant. On the small bookshelf, her favorite books remained untouched, as if waiting for her to return to finish reading them in her preferred armchair, the one near the fireplace. Michael rose slowly, his footsteps echoing across the wooden floor that knew every inch of his silent routine. He approached the fireplace, where the embers from the night before still maintained a timid warmth. With mechanical gestures, he fed the fire with a few pieces of wood, watching the flames come to life again, just as he did every morning since deciding to isolate himself in this mountain refuge. The decision to remain there, even after Sarah's departure, was not well understood by his few friends. "You need to move on," they said. "You can't hide from the world forever." But Michael knew he wasn't hiding. He was searching for something he couldn't even define himself. Perhaps it was peace, perhaps forgiveness, or perhaps just the need to be surrounded by memories of the love he had built with Sarah over 2 decades. The daily routine was his only safe harbor. Waking up before the sun, preparing the strong coffee that Sarah so appreciated, feeding the fire, checking the provisions in the small storage room attached to the cabin. These were simple tasks, but they kept him moving, preventing his thoughts from consuming him completely. On that particular morning, something seemed different in the air. Perhaps it was the intensity of the falling snow, or perhaps it was just his imagination playing tricks, as often happened on days when loneliness weighed more heavily. Michael approached the window again, wiping the foggy glass with the sleeve of his wool sweater. His eyes scanned the white landscape, searching for something he didn't even know what it was. The wind howled through the trees, bringing with it a melancholic melody that seemed to cradle his memories. Michael closed his eyes for a moment, allowing himself to relive the last summer he had spent with Sarah. She loved to sit on the porch on warm afternoons, watching the birds that came to feed in the small houses he had built, especially for them. "Every living being deserves a place to call home," she used to say, with that smile that illuminated her eyes. The distant sound of breaking branches brought him back to reality. Michael furrowed his brow, trying to identify the source of the noise. It wasn't uncommon for some animals to approach the cabin during winter, especially when snow made the search for food more difficult. Sarah always insisted on leaving some food outside for occasional visitors, a practice he had maintained even after her departure. Donning his heaviest coat and waterproof boots, Michael decided to investigate. The icy air cut his face as soon as he opened the door, but he was already accustomed to the adverse mountain conditions. His steps were careful in the deep snow, leaving a trail that would soon be erased by the intensifying snowstorm. It was then that Michael saw her for the first time. Among the snow-covered trees, a dark shape stood out against the white landscape. His heart raced when he realized it was a bear, and not just any bear, it was one of the largest he had ever seen in the region. The animal seemed to be in distress, its movement slow and heavy, and Michael soon noticed why. She was visibly pregnant. The scene paralyzed him for a few moments. Sarah always said that the most significant encounters in life happen when we least expect them, and this moment seemed to confirm her words. The bear raised her head, her eyes meeting Michael's. There was no aggression in her gaze, only a deep exhaustion that he knew well. It was the same weariness he carried in his own soul. "You're alone too, aren't you?" Michael murmured, more to himself than to the animal. The bear visibly shivered, and it was then that he realized she was in an even more critical state than he had initially imagined. The protective instinct that Sarah always admired in him spoke louder than any fear. With slow and calculated movements, Michael began to retreat towards the cabin, keeping his eyes fixed on the bear. She watched him with a mixture of caution and curiosity, as if trying to decide whether he represented a threat or a possible salvation. Upon reaching the door, he quickly entered and went straight to the storage room, where he kept emergency provisions. Sarah always insisted on keeping extra food stocks, not just for them, but also for the animals that occasionally appeared near the cabin during the harshest winters. "Nature gives us so much," she used to say. "The least we can do is give back when it needs us." With hands trembling more from nervousness than cold, Michael separated some smoked fish and honey, foods he knew were appropriate for bears. He hesitated for a moment before also grabbing some old blankets he kept in the back of the storage room. What he was about to do might seem crazy to anyone, but something inside him said it was the right thing to do. Upon returning outside, he found the bear still in the same place, as if waiting for him. Carefully, Michael began to place the food in the snow, maintaining a safe distance. The bear watched his every movement attentively, her tense body revealing the conflict between need and the instinct for self-preservation. "It's all right," Michael spoke in a low and calm voice, the same way Sarah used to talk to the animals that approached the cabin. "You're safe here." He stepped back a few paces, giving space for the animal to feel comfortable approaching the food. The bear didn't take long to give in to hunger. With faltering steps, she approached the food, beginning to eat with a voracity that confirmed his suspicions about the critical state she was in. Michael remained motionless, observing the scene with a mixture of fascination and concern. As the bear fed, he noticed that the snow was beginning to fall more intensely. The wind blew stronger, announcing an approaching storm. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and Michael knew that the next few hours would be crucial for the survival of the animal and her unborn cubs. It was then that he made a decision that would completely change the course of his solitary life. Carefully, he began to prepare an improvised shelter next to the cabin, using the old blankets and some boards he kept for repairs. Sarah always said that sometimes we need to take a leap of faith for life to show us new paths, and this seemed to be exactly one of those moments. The bear watched his movements as she finished eating, and Michael could swear there was a different gleam in her eyes now, something like recognition, or perhaps gratitude. "I'll call you Sarah," he whispered to himself, feeling an inexplicable peace as he pronounced that name again, this time associated with a new life presenting itself before him. The days that followed brought a new routine to Michael's life. The improvised shelter next to the cabin became a permanent refuge for the bear, whom he had affectionately begun to call Sarah. Each morning, even before the sun rose, he was already up, preparing food and checking if she was comfortable and warm. The storm that had announced itself on that first encounter lasted 3 whole days, making Michael's decision even more correct. During this period, he observed how the bear demonstrated surprising intelligence, using the blankets in the most efficient way possible to protect herself from the intense cold. At times, Michael found himself smiling as he saw how she organized her small space, remembering how his Sarah also had this peculiar characteristic of keeping everything in perfect order. As the days passed, the trust between man and animal grew extraordinarily. The bear no longer showed any sign of fear when Michael approached to bring food or check on her well-being. On the contrary, she seemed to eagerly await his visits, raising her head and emitting soft sounds when she heard him approach. One particularly cold morning brought a surprise that Michael would never forget. As he approached the shelter for his morning visit, he noticed that something was different. The sounds coming from inside were new, higher-pitched and multiple. His heart raced when he understood. The cubs had been born during the night. With extreme care and respecting a safe distance, Michael observed in wonder the scene unfolding before his eyes. 3 small cubs, still blind and completely dependent, nestled next to their mother, who licked them with dedication. The sight filled him with an emotion he hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if life was gifting him with a new purpose. "You are welcome," he whispered, feeling his eyes mist over. One of the cubs, in particular, immediately caught his attention. It was slightly larger than the others, and even newborn already demonstrated a unique curiosity, moving more and reacting to sounds with more intensity. In the days that followed, Michael dedicated himself entirely to caring for the bear family. He increased the amount of food, always concerned with ensuring that the mother bear had enough nutrition to nurse her cubs. He reinforced the shelter, adding more protection against the wind and installing extra coverage for the days of more intense snow. The most active cub, which Michael began to call Brave, continued to stand out among his siblings. He was the first to open his eyes, the first to try to stand on shaky paws, and definitely the most vocal of the three. Michael found himself spending hours observing his clumsy attempts to explore the small space of the shelter, always under the watchful eye of the mother. "He reminds me of you," he said aloud one morning, as if his Sarah could hear him. "Always wanting to discover something new, always curious about the world." The gentle breeze that passed at that moment seemed to bring with it the echo of her laughter, the one he missed hearing so much. Michael's routine gained a new meaning. The mornings were no longer marked only by solitary coffee by the window, but by the expectation of seeing the cubs' progress. The afternoons were filled with food preparation and shelter maintenance. The nights, once so silent and empty, now had as a soundtrack the soft sounds of the bears sleeping near his cabin. One day, while observing Brave in another of his explorations, now steadier on his paws, Michael realized that something had changed within him. The pain of loss, although still present, was no longer the only thing occupying his thoughts. There was now room for concern for other beings, for planning for the future, for small daily joys. It was during this time that he began to document everything in a diary. Each progress of the cubs, each new observed behavior, each special moment was carefully recorded. "Sarah always said that the most important stories need to be preserved," he wrote on one of the pages, "and this is a story that deserves to be told." The presence of the bears brought back to life not only the lonely man of the mountain, but also the cabin itself. The space around, once so silent and static, gained movement and purpose. Michael installed additional small protections, created specific areas for feeding, and began to plan adaptations for when the cubs would be larger and more active. The peace of the mountain days was interrupted on a morning of exceptionally clear sky. Michael was in his usual routine, observing Brave and his siblings playing near the shelter, when he heard the unmistakable sound of an engine approaching. His heart immediately raced. Visits to this remote region were rare, especially during winter. The jeep that appeared on the snow-covered trail brought Robert, his longtime friend who worked at the local city hall. Michael hadn't seen him since the day he decided to isolate himself in the mountains, and the worried expression on his friend's face indicated that this wasn't a casual visit. "Michael," Robert called, cautiously descending from the vehicle, his eyes fixed on the bears now retreating to the shelter. "We need to talk. It's important." The mother bear, sensing the presence of the stranger, protectively positioned herself in front of her cubs, although maintaining a surprising calm, as if trusting Michael's judgment about the situation. Brave, curious as always, tried to peek out from between his mother's paws, involuntarily provoking a smile from Michael despite the tension of the moment. "Let's go inside," Michael responded, indicating the cabin with a gesture. Inside, while preparing coffee for his friend, he could feel the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. Robert observed the bear's shelter through the window, his expression a mixture of astonishment and concern. "Do you have any idea of the risk you're taking?" Robert finally broke the silence. "Bears are not domestic animals, Michael. And there's more. Reports of hunters in the region have arrived. They're using sophisticated equipment, including helicopters. If they discover that you're sheltering these bears..." Michael served the coffee with calculated movements, trying to organize his thoughts. "I can't abandon them, Robert. You don't understand. They saved me as much as I saved them. Michael, I know that since Sarah..." Robert hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I know you're looking for something to fill the void, but this is dangerous. Not just for you, but for the entire community. If these bears get used to human..." "They are not a threat," Michael interrupted, his voice firm but controlled. "Sarah, the bear, she's different. And the cubs, you need to see how special they are, especially Brave. There's something unique about them, something that needs to be protected." Robert sighed, running his hand through his graying hair in a gesture of concern. "Listen, I came here because I'm worried about you, but also because I have information that could change everything. These bears, there's a possibility they're of a rare species, possibly endangered. The revelation made Michael straighten up in his chair. What do you mean? There have been recent studies about a subspecies of bears that inhabited this region decades ago, but was believed to have disappeared. The characteristics you described, the unusual behavior, everything indicates they could be them. Michael stood up and walked to the window, observing the shelter where Brave was now playing with a piece of branch under the watchful eye of his mother. That explains a lot, he murmured, more to himself than to Robert. If we can prove that they are really of this rare species, we can get legal protection for them, Robert continued. But we need documentation, evidence, and we need to act fast before the hunters find them. A plan was beginning to form in Michael's mind. He remembered the diary he had been keeping, the detailed observations he had made about the bear's behavior. I've been recording everything since the beginning, he said, turning to his friend. Every progress, every unique characteristic. I can start photographing too, making videos. Robert nodded slowly, a glimmer of hope appearing in his eyes. That would be a start, but we need to be discreet. If the hunters discover what we're doing. In the weeks that followed Robert's visit, Michael immersed himself in a new mission. With the camera that Sarah had given him as a gift years ago, he began to meticulously document every moment of the bears' lives. The equipment, which had remained stored since her departure, now gained a new purpose. The first photo session was a surprising experience. The mother bear, as if understanding the importance of this work, maintained an admirable serenity while Michael photographed. The cubs, in turn, reacted in distinct ways to the presence of the camera. While two of them remained more reserved, Brave demonstrated an extraordinary curiosity about the equipment. "You're not afraid of anything, are you?" Michael murmured with a smile, observing through the lens how the cub cautiously approached the tripod he had set up. Brave's unique personality was revealing itself more and more. He was observant, intelligent, and demonstrated a surprising ability to learn from each new experience. One morning, while organizing the hundreds of photos he had already taken, Michael noticed something extraordinary. The images revealed behavior patterns that differed significantly from what was known about common bears in the region. The way the mother organized the shelter space, how she taught the cubs to look for specific foods, and especially how she communicated with them through a series of subtle sounds and gestures, all indicated that Robert might be right about them being a rare species. Michael's diary had transformed into an improvised scientific document. Each page was filled with detailed observations, accompanied by carefully dated and referenced photographs. "The social interaction between them is extraordinarily complex," he wrote in one entry. "Brave, in particular, demonstrates levels of understanding and adaptability that defy everything we know about young bear behavior." Robert began to visit the cabin more frequently, bringing research materials and information about other rare bear species. Together, they began to compile a dossier that could draw the attention of environmental authorities. The friends' visits also brought worrying news about increased hunter activity in the region. "They're using cutting-edge technology," Robert explained during one of his visits, as they watched Brave trying to climb a tree near the shelter. "Drones, thermal cameras, tracking equipment. We need to act quickly." The urgency of the situation made Michael intensify his documentation efforts. He began to record videos of the interactions between mother and cubs, capturing precious moments that demonstrated their exceptional intelligence. One of the most impressive videos showed Brave imitating his mother, using a stone to break the ice of a small nearby stream, a demonstration of learning by observation that left Robert amazed. "This is incredible, Michael," exclaimed his friend, watching the recording for the third time. "This type of behavior is extremely rare. If we can get more evidence like this, we'll have a solid case to present to the authorities." The documentation work brought a new dimension to Michael's relationship with the bears. Each moment captured by the camera was also a moment of deeper connection, of mutual understanding that transcended the barriers between species. The mother bear seemed to understand the importance of this work, allowing Michael to get closer and closer to record her moments with the cubs. One afternoon, while photographing the bears, Michael had an epiphany. He realized that this project wasn't just about protecting a rare species. It was about preserving something much more precious. the ability of different forms of life to connect and learn from each other. In his diary, he wrote, "Sarah always said that true love manifests itself in mysterious ways." Now I fully understand what she meant. The sun was beginning to set when Michael finished organizing another set of photographs. He observed through the window how Brave snuggled up with his mother and siblings to sleep. The little bear had grown considerably in recent weeks, but maintained that curious and intelligent look that had captivated him from the first day. The first sign that something was wrong came with the distant sound of a helicopter on a particularly cold morning. Michael was in his usual routine of photographing the bears when the noise began to echo through the mountains. The reaction was immediate. The mother bear raised her head in alert, her eyes fixed on the sky while the cubs instinctively grouped around her. "Calm down," Michael whispered, more to himself than to the animals. He quickly stored his photographic equipment and began to observe the sky through the binoculars that Robert had left for emergencies. The helicopter was far away, but its presence was a disturbing reminder of the threat that loomed over this refuge. In the days that followed, the signs of danger multiplied. Robert appeared one night without warning, with alarming news. "They found tracks," he said, his voice laden with concern. "The hunters are getting closer. They have informants in the region and already know there are bears around here." Michael felt a tightness in his chest as he looked out the window and saw Brave playing carefreely with a piece of tree bark. The cub had become not only bigger and stronger, but also more daring in his explorations. His natural curiosity, once so charming, now became a source of concern. "We need to accelerate the legal protection process," Robert continued, spreading a series of documents on the table. "I got some contacts in the Environmental Protection Department. They're interested in our material, but they need more scientific evidence." The nights became an exercise in constant vigilance. Michael began to sleep in short intervals, always alert to any suspicious sound. He installed motion sensors around the cabin, another equipment provided by Robert, which sounded a silent alert on his cell phone whenever something approached. One dawn, one of the sensors went off. Michael got up with a start, his heart pounding in his chest. Through the window, he saw movement among the trees. It wasn't the bears who were sleeping in their shelter, but human figures moving stealthily in the darkness, hunters doing a reconnaissance of the area. With silent movements, Michael activated the emergency light system he had installed around the property. The sudden glare startled the intruders, who quickly disappeared into the forest. But the message was clear. They knew exactly where to look. The next morning, the mother bear showed unusual restlessness. Her eyes constantly scanned the horizon, and she kept the cubs closer than normal. Michael recognized that behavior. It was the same instinct that Sarah demonstrated when she felt something wasn't right. "I need to do something," Michael said to himself, observing how Brave tried to imitate his mother's vigilant posture. The cub, even in his youth, seemed to capture the tension in the air. His usual playfulness was replaced by a more focused attention to his surroundings. Robert appeared at the end of that afternoon, bringing more surveillance equipment and news that made Michael's blood freeze. The hunters had established a base camp just a few kilometers away. "They're preparing for a larger operation," Robert explained. "They have professional equipment, snow vehicles, a whole structure." As they discussed protection strategies, a sharp sound cut through the air. The alarm of one of the most distant sensors had gone off. Michael and Robert ran to the window, in time to see the mother bear leading her cubs to a denser area of the forest. Brave, normally the most resistant to following orders, this time didn't hesitate to accompany his mother. "They're getting closer," Robert murmured, checking the sensor coordinates on his tablet. "And this time, it's not just scouts. We need to act now, Michael. We can't wait for bureaucracy anymore." The night that followed the sensor alert was one of intense planning. Michael and Robert, sitting at the kitchen table illuminated only by a lantern to avoid drawing attention, pored over maps of the region and various documents. The silence of the mountains seemed to amplify every suspicious noise, keeping them in a constant state of alert. "I have a contact at the State Environmental Reserve," Robert explained, pointing to a spot on the map about 50 kilometers away. "They have the structure to receive and protect endangered species. If we can prove that these bears are really of the rare species we suspect, they can offer immediate protection." Michael observed through the window the bears' shelter, where he could distinguish the silhouettes of the sleeping family. "But how are we going to transport them safely?" The mother bear would never allow strangers to approach the cubs, and Brave, his voice faltered as he thought of the curious little bear that had become so special. "That's why we need to act intelligently," Robert replied, unrolling another map, this one more detailed, showing the ancient trails of the region. "There's a little-known path that connects this area to the reserve. It was used by ancient mountain inhabitants, but has fallen into oblivion for decades. The hunters probably don't know about it." The plan began to take shape as the hours advanced. They would use the knowledge Michael had acquired about the bear's behavior to naturally guide them towards the ancient trail. Robert would take care of preparing the necessary documentation and alerting the reserve about the imminent arrival of the animals. "We need to start tomorrow," Michael decided, getting up to prepare more coffee. The hunters are getting closer and closer, and the mother bear is already showing signs of restlessness. She senses the danger. The dawn brought with it a dense fog that covered the mountains, offering natural camouflage for the beginning of the plan. Michael subtly began to alter the bear's feeding points, gradually moving them in the direction of the ancient trail. The mother bear, demonstrating her extraordinary intelligence, seemed to understand that something important was happening. Brave, in particular, was more attentive than ever. The cub observed Michael's every movement with intensity, as if trying to decipher his intentions. In a touching moment, he approached closer than normal, staring at Michael with those eyes that seemed to hold wisdom beyond his age. "You trust me, don't you, little one?" Michael murmured, feeling a lump in his throat. The answer came in the form of a soft grunt and a head movement that extraordinarily resembled a nod of understanding. Robert returned late in the afternoon with encouraging news. The reserve had agreed to receive the bears based on the photographic evidence and detailed records they had compiled. They were especially impressed with the videos of Brave's behavior, he explained, a smile illuminating his tired face. The preparation for the journey that awaited them required all the knowledge and experience Michael had accumulated in recent months. Every detail needed to be considered: the resting points along the way, water sources, safe places to spend the night. "Sarah always said that the greatest journeys begin with small steps," Michael reflected aloud as he organized the necessary supplies. She would be proud to see all of this. Night fell over the mountain, bringing with it a deceptive calm. On the horizon, distant lights betrayed the movement of hunters. Time was running out, and the success of the plan depended not only on the carefully elaborated strategy, but also on the trust that had been established between Michael and that extraordinary family of bears. Lying in his bed, Michael couldn't sleep. His thoughts alternated between memories of Sarah and concerns about the bear's future. In his diary, he wrote his last notes before the great journey that awaited them. "Tomorrow we begin our walk to freedom. Sarah, my love, I know that somehow you are guiding our steps." The day began with a fine drizzle that soon turned into light snow, creating a natural curtain that could help mask their movements. Michael started the preparations even before the sun rose, methodically organizing everything they would need for the journey. Each movement was calculated, each decision weighed the fate of those he had sworn to protect. The mother bear demonstrated an almost supernatural understanding of the situation. When Michael approached the shelter with the first foods of the day, strategically positioned to initiate the movement towards the ancient trail, she was already alert and prepared, keeping the cubs close and organized. Brave, contrary to his usually restless behavior, remained extraordinarily focused. His attentive eyes alternated between his mother and Michael, as if understanding the gravity of the moment. The other two cubs, although more reserved, followed the example of their bolder brother, remaining alert and responsive. "This is it, little ones," Michael whispered, his heart heavy with the mixture of hope and apprehension. "We're going to find a safe place for you." Robert had left the night before to prepare some strategic points along the way and coordinate with the reserve team. He left Michael with an emergency communication radio and a GPS specially programmed with the coordinates of safe points along the trail. The first part of the journey would be the most delicate. They needed to move away from the area near the cabin without drawing the attention of the hunters, who, according to Robert's latest reports, had established observation points in strategic locations in the region. Michael led the way with extreme caution, stopping frequently to check the surroundings and listen for any suspicious sounds. The mother bear followed him at a safe distance, guiding her cubs with admirable grace and precision. Brave, always curious, occasionally tried to move ahead, only to be gently called back by his mother through soft, low sounds. The snow began to fall more intensely when they reached the first stopping point, a small natural cave that Robert had marked on the map. Michael checked the coordinates on the GPS, confirming they were on the right path. He observed with admiration how the mother bear organized her cubs in the temporary shelter, keeping them warm and protected. It was during this first stop that Michael noticed something extraordinary. Brave, instead of settling in with his siblings, maintained a sentinel position at the cave entrance, imitating the vigilant behavior he had observed in Michael during all those months. It was an impressive demonstration of learning and adaptation. "You really are special, aren't you?" Michael murmured, feeling a wave of pride and affection for the little bear. The response came in the form of a deep and attentive look, so full of intelligence that for a moment Michael almost forgot he was facing a wild animal. The radio crackled with Robert's voice, bringing worrying news. The hunters had noticed the lack of activity near the cabin and were mobilizing teams for a wider search. Time, which was already scarce, became even more precious. "We need to continue," Michael said in a low voice, more to himself than to the bears. But to his surprise, the mother bear was already up, gathering her cubs. It was as if she had understood the urgency in his voice. The next stage of the journey would be even more challenging. The ancient trail, long abandoned, traversed a particularly rugged region of the mountain. The snow, which continued to fall, made the path even more treacherous. Michael consulted his diary one last time before resuming the walk. On the pages, besides the scientific notes, he had recorded something that Sarah used to say: "The greatest adventures in life are those we face for love." Putting the diary away, he looked at the bear family that faithfully followed him and knew with absolute certainty that he was living exactly the kind of adventure Sarah had described. The third part of the journey brought with it a dramatic change in the weather. The wind increased significantly, transforming the gentle snow into a cutting storm that drastically reduced visibility. Michael consulted the GPS with increasing frequency, aware that a single deviation from the route could be fatal. The mother bear demonstrated admirable resistance, protecting her cubs with her body as they advanced against the wind. The little ones, especially the two younger ones, were beginning to show signs of fatigue. Only Brave maintained a steady pace, his attentive eyes fixed on Michael's footprints in the snow, following them with a determination that defied his young age. "We need to find shelter," Michael murmured to himself, checking the map on his GPS again. Robert had marked several safe stopping points along the way, but the storm had forced them to deviate slightly from the original route. The next planned refuge was at least 2 hours' walk away, too long under those conditions. It was Brave who first noticed the opening in the mountainside. The cub emitted a sharp and characteristic sound, drawing the attention of his mother and Michael. It was a small natural cave, not very deep, but enough to offer protection against the worst of the storm. "Good job, little one," Michael praised, while quickly checking the interior of the cave to ensure it was safe. The mother bear led her cubs inside, organizing them in a corner where the rock offered greater protection against the wind that still managed to penetrate the entrance. Michael took advantage of the forced pause to check the radio. The storm caused considerable interference, but he could still catch fragments of Robert's voice. "Hunters, helicopter. Southern direction." The message was clear enough. The hunters had mobilized aerial resources and were moving in their direction. Observing the resting bears, Michael couldn't help but admire how this improvised family adapted to each new challenge. The mother bear kept her cubs warm and safe, while Brave, even exhausted, remained attentive to any suspicious movement or sound coming from outside. "Sarah would be proud of you," Michael whispered, allowing himself a moment of reflection. "She always said that true strength comes from the ability to care for each other." The storm continued for hours, forcing them to remain sheltered much longer than planned. Michael took advantage of the time to make notes in his diary, documenting not only the scientific aspects of the bear's behavior, but also the moments of deep connection he witnessed between them. It was during this period of observation that he noticed something extraordinary. Brave had developed his own system of communication with his siblings, using different sounds and gestures to alert them about possible dangers or to calm them when they became too agitated. It was a level of behavioral complexity that went beyond anything Michael had ever recorded. When the storm finally began to subside, the sky was already darkening, Traveling during the night was not in the original plans, but circumstances left them no choice. The hunters would certainly take advantage of the first light of day to resume their search with full force. "We need to continue," Michael announced softly, observing how the mother bear immediately began to wake her cubs. The synchrony between them was so natural now that words seemed unnecessary. Brave was the first to position himself at the cave entrance, his small body tense with anticipation. His siblings followed him, more hesitant but equally determined. The mother bear made a final check of her cubs before indicating that they were ready to proceed. The night in the mountain presented its own challenges and dangers, but also offered the cover of darkness. Michael knew they needed to take advantage of every minute of this natural protection. With the GPS in one hand and a weak flashlight in the other, he began to guide the group again along the ancient trail. The moon occasionally emerged from between the clouds, casting ghostly shadows over the snow. The silence was broken only by the soft sound of their footsteps and the occasional low call from Brave, who seemed to have taken on the responsibility of keeping his siblings in formation. Dawn brought with it a treacherous clarity. The snow had stopped completely, leaving behind a scene of devastating beauty. The mountains, covered by a white and immaculate mantle, shone under the first rays of the sun. However, this same beauty represented a real danger. Their tracks were now clearly visible in the fresh snow. Michael consulted the GPS once more, calculating the distance to the next safe point. They were closer to the reserve than he had imagined, having covered a considerable distance during the night crossing. However, the distant sound of a helicopter reminded him that the journey was far from over. The mother bear showed signs of fatigue after the long night of walking, but her determination remained unshakable. Her cubs, although exhausted, kept moving, motivated by Brave's example, who continued to lead his siblings with surprising maturity. The radio crackled with Robert's urgent voice. "Michael, you need to hurry. The hunters found the cave where you sheltered. They're following your footprints." The news made Michael's heart race. They needed to find a way to throw off their pursuers, and fast. It was then that he remembered something Sarah used to say about the ancient mountain trails. Nature always offers more than one path for those who know how to look. Observing the terrain ahead, Michael noticed a peculiar rock formation. Years of erosion had created a kind of natural labyrinth, with several passages between the rocks. If they could cross that area, they could confuse their pursuers and gain precious time. "Let's try something different," Michael murmured, more to himself than to the bears. However, as had often happened in recent months, the mother bear seemed to understand his intention. With a soft sound, she began to guide her cubs towards the rocks. The crossing of the rocky labyrinth required all the skill and patience they possessed. The passages were narrow in some points, forcing them to look for alternative routes. Brave, surprisingly, began to demonstrate a remarkable ability to find the best paths, as if he could intuit which passages would be safer for his family. At a particularly challenging moment, when they seemed to have reached a dead end, it was Brave who discovered an almost invisible passage between two rocks. The little bear caught everyone's attention with a low and characteristic sound, pointing the way with his snout. "You never cease to amaze me, little one," Michael smiled, feeling a wave of pride as he saw how the cub had developed. In his diary, which he now carried in a waterproof backpack, there were pages and pages documenting Brave's extraordinary evolution. The sound of the helicopter was closer now, but the rock formation offered some protection against aerial observation. Michael knew, however, that they couldn't stay there for long. They needed to reach the dense forest area that, according to the map, was less than an hour's walk away. It was during this strategic pause that Michael witnessed another demonstration of the bear's extraordinary intelligence. The mother bear began to use her powerful limbs to drag snow and cover their footprints, a behavior Michael had never observed before. Even more impressive was seeing how Brave and his siblings immediately began to imitate her, working together to erase the signs of their passage. "Sarah always said that the greatest teachers are those who teach us without words," Michael reflected, mentally recording another observation for his diary. The scene before him was living proof of this wisdom, a family of bears not only fighting for their survival, but demonstrating levels of cooperation and intelligence that defied all expectations. The sun was already high when they reached the edge of the dense forest. The icy air burned Michael's lungs, who kept one eye on the GPS and another on the sky, where the sound of the helicopter was becoming increasingly present. The mother bear guided her cubs with renewed determination, as if she felt they were approaching a crucial moment. The radio crackled again with Robert's voice, this time more urgent. "Michael, the hunters have split into 3 groups. They're trying to surround the area. The reserve team is on the way to intercept them, but it will still take time." The news made Michael quickly recalculate his options. The forest offered cover, but it could also become a trap if the hunters managed to surround them. They needed to find an alternative route, something that would lead them to the reserve without being exposed. It was at this moment that Brave once again demonstrated his extraordinary perception. The young bear began to make low and insistent sounds, drawing everyone's attention to a specific direction. Michael observed carefully and realized what the cub had noticed, a rock formation that created a kind of natural corridor, partially hidden by vegetation. "Once again you show us the way, little one," Michael murmured with admiration. The mother bear was already guiding the other cubs in the indicated direction, demonstrating total confidence in Brave's instinct. The natural corridor was narrow, but offered excellent protection from both aerial observation and land pursuers. The rocky walls, covered with moss and snow, created a milder microclimate, and the ground there was less slippery. They advanced for about half an hour when the first sign of real danger arose. Sounds of voices and equipment approaching echoed through the corridor walls. The hunters had found the entrance to the passage and were approaching rapidly. The mother bear reacted instantly, positioning herself protectively in front of her cubs. Michael could see the dilemma in her eyes. She wanted to protect her little ones, but also knew that a direct confrontation could be disastrous. It was Brave who found the solution. The young bear discovered a small cavity in the rock wall, practically invisible unless one was very close. With soft and insistent sounds, he began to guide his siblings to the hiding place. Michael observed in wonder as the bear family organized themselves in the tight space. The mother bear supervised everything with surprising calmness, ensuring that each of her cubs was safe and silent. Brave, even being the last to take shelter, remained alert, his intelligent eyes fixed in the direction from which the sounds were coming. "I trust you," Michael whispered, before making his most difficult decision yet. He needed to create a distraction to ensure that the hunters wouldn't discover the bear's hiding place. With calculated movements, Michael began to move away, purposely leaving visible marks in the snow and vegetation. His plan was simple: to lure the hunters away from the bears, giving them time to find a safer path to the reserve. Before distancing himself completely, Michael looked one last time at the hiding place. His eyes met Brave's, and at that moment a deep understanding passed between them. The young bear emitted a very low sound, almost a whisper, which Michael interpreted as a farewell. "We'll meet again, little one," he promised in a low voice, feeling his heart heavy. Sarah always said that true friends always find a way back to each other. The sound of the hunters approaching grew stronger with each second. Michael adjusted the backpack on his shoulders and began to move in the opposite direction from the hiding place, making sure to leave clearly visible tracks. His radio was still working and he could hear Robert coordinating with the reserve team. Snow began to fall again, this time in large, heavy flakes that quickly began to cover his footprints. Michael smiled, thinking about how nature sometimes seemed to conspire in favor of those who fought to protect it. The hours that followed were a test of endurance and cunning. Michael kept in constant motion, creating false trails and leading the hunters further and further away from the bear's hiding place. The cold was intense, but adrenaline kept him warm and alert. Robert maintained regular contact via radio, informing about the movements of the different groups of hunters. The good news was that the reserve team was approaching rapidly, bringing with them the official authorization for the bear's protection. "They really are a rare species, Michael," Robert's voice sounded hopeful through the radio. "Your photographs and documentation were crucial. The reserve has already issued an emergency protection order." The snow continued to fall, now with more intensity, creating a white curtain that made visibility difficult. Michael knew this played in his favor, making it harder for the hunters to maintain his trail. However, it also meant that he had no way of knowing if the bears had managed to leave the hiding place safely. It was then that something extraordinary happened. A familiar sound, unlike any other, cut through the icy air. It was Brave's characteristic call, the one Michael had learned to recognize over the months. It came from an unexpected direction, further ahead on his path. Michael's heart raced. Following the sound cautiously, he began to move between the snow-covered trees. The call repeated, closer this time, guiding him like a beacon in the storm. After a few minutes of careful walking, Michael saw them. The bear family had found an alternative path through the forest and was now gathered in a small clearing, protected by dense trees. Brave was standing on a low rock, clearly serving as a sentinel while emitting his directed calls. "You really are incredible," Michael whispered, observing how the mother bear kept the other cubs organized and calm, even in such a tense situation. Brave, upon noticing his presence, emitted a soft sound of recognition. The radio crackled again with Robert's voice. "Michael, the reserve team is less than 10 minutes from your position. The hunters are retreating." "We did it!" The news brought immense relief, but Michael knew they couldn't let their guard down yet. He approached the group carefully, maintaining slow and predictable movements. The mother bear watched him with those deep and intelligent eyes, as if assessing the situation. It was Brave who broke protocol first. The young bear descended from his lookout position and approached Michael with confident steps. He stopped at a respectful distance, but his posture demonstrated absolute trust. "You saved us this time, little one," Michael spoke softly. "Sarah always said that the greatest heroes are those who think of others first." The sound of approaching helicopters made everyone look to the sky, but this time it was different. The aircraft bore the markings of the environmental reserve, and soon they could see vehicles approaching on the nearest road. The mother bear, once again demonstrating her extraordinary intelligence, began to guide her cubs towards the newcomers, as if understanding that this was their chance for definitive safety. Brave, however, hesitated. He turned back one last time to Michael, his eyes expressing something that words could not translate. Michael felt tears freeze on his face as he observed that scene. In his diary later he would write, "Today I learned that true love transcends species and words. It manifests itself in actions, choices, and looks that say more than 1,000 words." The days that followed the arrival of the reserve team were filled with intense activity. The area was officially declared an environmental protection zone, and the hunters, facing serious legal consequences for their actions, were forced to completely abandon the region. Michael observed everything with a mixture of relief and melancholy, knowing that an important phase of his life was coming to an end. The bears' adaptation to the new environment was surprisingly smooth. The reserve had prepared a special area for them, with characteristics similar to their natural habitat, but with constant protection and monitoring. The mother bear, always wise in her decisions, seemed to immediately understand that this would be her new safe home. "It's amazing how quickly they adapted," commented Anna, the reserve's chief biologist, as she and Michael observed the family through the special glass of the monitoring center, "especially the one you call Brave. I've never seen such extraordinary behavior in such a young bear." Michael smiled, watching as Brave led his siblings on another of their explorations of the new territory. The young bear had maintained his exceptional curiosity and intelligence, but now demonstrated them in a much safer and more appropriate environment. "They're not just special," Michael replied, leafing through his observation diary that was now being used as the basis for an official scientific study. "They're unique. Sarah always said that there are encounters that change our way of seeing the world, and these bears certainly changed mine." The documentation Michael had maintained over the months proved invaluable. His photographs, detailed notes, and behavioral observations were helping scientists better understand not only this rare species of bears, but also the complex relationships that can develop between humans and wild animals. Robert, who now coordinated the region's environmental protection program, visited frequently. "You know, Michael," he said during one of his visits, "what you did here goes far beyond saving a family of bears. You helped us understand something fundamental about coexistence and mutual respect." His friend's words touched Michael deeply. He thought of Sarah, of how she always insisted that every living being has its own role in the great fabric of life. Now he fully understood what she meant. The mother bear had established her territory in the quietest part of the reserve, where a small waterfall provided fresh and abundant water. Michael noticed how she maintained many of the behaviors she had developed during their time together, especially the organized way she managed the space and cared for the cubs. Brave, in turn, continued to surprise everyone. The young bear had developed his own method of communication with his siblings, using different sounds and gestures that the reserve researchers had never observed before. It was as if he was creating his own language, adapted to the specific needs of his family. "He has a lot of you in him," Anna commented one day, observing how Brave patiently taught his siblings to find the best fruits in the tallest trees. This way of caring for others, of teaching, it's not common behavior in such young bears. Michael felt his eyes mist over at the comment. He has a lot of Sarah in him too, he thought to himself, remembering how his wife always found ways to help others, even in the most difficult situations. One afternoon, while organizing his last notes at the reserve's research center, Michael received news that filled him with pride. The species had been officially classified and registered, and his discoveries would be published in an important scientific journal. "We want you to be the lead author of the article," Anna announced, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "Your observations, your dedication, all of this helped us understand something we had never seen before." Spring arrived at the reserve, bringing with it not only the blooming of flowers, but also a new phase in the bears' lives. The cubs had grown considerably, and their adaptation to the protected environment was an absolute success. Michael, who now divided his time between his renovated cabin and the research center, observed their changes with a heart full of joy. Brave, in particular, had become a true legend among the reserve researchers. His unique behavior and extraordinary learning ability were redefining everything known about bear intelligence. He not only learned quickly, but also taught, a behavior that scientists had rarely observed in wild animals. "It's as if he understands that he has a mission," Anna commented during an observation session. "The way he cares for his siblings, how he explores the environment. There's a purpose in each of his actions." Michael smiled, recognizing in the biologist's words something that Sarah always said. "Every living being has its own form of wisdom. We just need to have eyes to see and a heart to understand." The mother bear also continued to surprise everyone. She had established an impressive routine in the reserve, creating behavior patterns that researchers had never documented before. Her way of organizing the territory, teaching the cubs, and interacting with the environment was revolutionizing the understanding of the social complexity of bears. One particularly special morning, Michael arrived at the reserve to find a scene that left him speechless. Brave was at the top of a small hill, observing the sunrise with a posture that extraordinarily reminded him of how Sarah used to appreciate mornings in the mountain. "You have a lot of her in you, you know," Michael whispered, maintaining a safe distance but feeling emotionally closer than ever. That curiosity, that way of caring for others. As if he had heard his words, Brave turned in his direction. His eyes, now more mature but still maintaining that special gleam of intelligence, met Michael's. For a moment, it seemed that time had stopped. It was at this instant that Michael fully understood what Sarah had always tried to teach him, that true love knows no boundaries, that it manifests itself in the most unexpected ways and teaches us lessons that go beyond our initial understanding. Michael's diary, now transformed into an important source of scientific research, was filled not only with technical observations, but also with deep reflections on connection, healing, and renewal. Perhaps, he wrote in one of his last entries, "The true purpose of our losses is to open us up to new types of love, to teach us that the heart has an infinite capacity to expand and embrace the unexpected." The news of the publication of the scientific article about the bears spread quickly through the academic community. Michael's and the reserve team's discoveries were changing the way scientists understood not only bear behavior, but also the complex relationships possible between humans and wild animals. "You've created something extraordinary here," Robert commented during one of his regular visits. "It's not just about environmental protection or scientific research. It's about showing that there's a better path, a path of understanding and mutual respect." Michael observed Brave playing with his siblings in the protected area, his heart overflowing with emotion. The young bear had become not only a symbol of hope for the preservation of his species, but also a living reminder that love can flourish in the most unexpected places and in the most surprising forms. A year had passed since the bears found their new home in the reserve. Michael's work gained international recognition, and his story inspired significant changes in conservation policies across the country. The reserve had become a reference center for studies on animal behavior and preservation of rare species. The most notable transformation, however, was not in the papers or policies, but in the very life that pulsed in the reserve. The bear family had become the heart of a thriving community. Other animals of the same species, believed to be extinct, began to be found and brought to the protected area, creating a growing and healthy population. "It's amazing how it all started with an act of compassion," reflected Anna, as she and Michael watched Brave, now a strong and imposing young bear, leading a group of newly arrived bears to the reserve. A single moment of kindness triggered all this change. Michael smiled, thinking about how Sarah would have loved to see this. The diary that had begun as a record of his pain had transformed into a manual of hope, now used by researchers and conservationists around the world. His observations about Brave's unique behavior and his family were changing the way people understood the intelligence and emotional complexity of wild animals. "You know what's most extraordinary?" Robert commented during one of his regular visits. "It's not just the bears that are teaching each other. It's the people. Every visitor who comes here, every researcher who studies your records leaves transformed." The mother bear, although older, maintained her characteristic dignity and wisdom. She had become a kind of matriarch in the reserve, her behavior serving as a model for other arriving bears. Her unique way of organizing the territory and teaching had spread through the population, creating behavior patterns that scientists had never observed before. Michael spent hours observing how Brave interacted with the new members of the community. The young bear had developed an extraordinary ability to integrate newcomers, using that same unique language of sounds and gestures he had developed with his siblings. It was as if he understood his responsibility in preserving not just his species, but an entire way of life. "Sarah was right," Michael wrote in his diary one night, observing the stars from the porch of his renovated cabin. "True love not only transforms those who love, but creates waves that spread far beyond what we can see." The reserve had become a place of healing, not only for animals, but for people too. Groups of students visited regularly, learning not just about environmental conservation, but about empathy, respect, and the importance of protecting all forms of life. A special program had been created, inspired by Michael's story and the bears, to rehabilitate injured animals and reintroduce them into nature. The gentle and patient method he had used with Brave and his family became the basis for a new approach in treating wild animals. "You've created something much bigger than a reserve," Anna told Michael during a particularly significant afternoon as they watched Brave teaching a group of young bears to search for food sustainably. "You've shown that there's a different path, one that unites science and compassion." Michael observed everything with a deep feeling of gratitude. The pain that had led him to isolate himself in the mountains had transformed into something beautiful and meaningful. In each bear that arrived at the reserve, in each researcher who marveled at their discoveries, in each visitor who left transformed, he saw a bit of Sarah, a reflection of her love for life in all its forms. On an autumn morning, as nature prepared for another cycle of renewal, Michael climbed to his favorite observation point in the reserve. The spot offered a privileged view of the entire valley that was now home to dozens of bears, all descendants of, or connected in some way to the first family he had helped save. Brave, now fully grown, had become a legendary figure in the reserve. His influence went far beyond the typical behavior of his species. He had created a true social system, teaching and guiding other bears in a way that continued to surprise even the most experienced researchers. "Today is a special day," Michael thought, adjusting his camera. The mother bear, though older and slower, maintained her majestic presence. She had recently become a grandmother. One of her daughters had given birth to 2 cubs who, to Michael's delight, demonstrated the same extraordinary curiosity that had characterized Brave in his youth. "The circle is complete," he whispered to himself, observing how Brave gently interacted with the new members of his extended family. The great bear had maintained that special look, that spark of intelligence and compassion that had made him unique from the first day. Michael's work had transformed into something much larger than he had ever imagined. His diary, now published in several languages, had become a reference not only for studies on animal behavior, but also for people seeking to better understand their own connection with nature. The reserve had expanded significantly, creating ecological corridors that allowed the bears to migrate naturally, maintaining the genetic diversity of the population. The conservation model that had begun with an act of compassion was now being replicated in different parts of the world. Sarah always said that true love creates deep roots, Michael wrote in his last diary entry. Now, I fully understand what she meant. These roots not only sustain but grow, spread and create new lives. As he watched the sun set over the reserve, Michael reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought him here. The pain of loss that had made him isolate himself in the mountains had transformed into something beautiful and meaningful, something that transcended his own existence. The new cubs played under Brave's watchful eye, who occasionally emitted those characteristic sounds that Michael had learned to recognize as signs of guidance and protection. It was as if the frightened young bear he had encountered years ago was now passing on the lessons of love and care he had received. "You were right, my love," Michael whispered to the wind, thinking of Sarah. True love never really ends. It just transforms, finds new paths, touches new lives. Michael and the bear's story had become more than a success case in environmental conservation. It was a testament to the transformative power of love, compassion, and connection between all forms of life. Each visitor who came to the reserve, each researcher who studied the bear's unique behavior patterns, each person who read his diary carried with them a part of this message. And there, atop that hill, observing the living legacy of his journey, Michael finally found the peace he had been seeking. It wasn't the end of a story, but the beginning of many others, all intertwined by the golden thread of love that Sarah had taught him to see in every living being. Brave, as if sensing the special moment, raised his head and looked directly at Michael. His eyes, still bright and deep as on the first day, seemed to share an understanding that transcended the barriers between species. It was a look of recognition, of gratitude, of connection. "Thank you," Michael whispered, knowing that some of life's deepest lessons come from the most unexpected places, and that love, in its purest and truest form, has the power to heal, transform, and create new beginnings. The years that followed brought continuous growth and evolution to the reserve. Michael's work and the bear's story had inspired a global movement of conservation and coexistence between humans and wildlife. The reserve became not just a sanctuary for bears, but a living laboratory where scientists, conservationists, and nature enthusiasts from around the world came to learn and contribute. Brave's influence continued to grow. As he matured, his role in the bear community evolved. He became not just a leader but a mediator, often intervening in conflicts between bears and finding peaceful resolutions. His problem-solving abilities and emotional intelligence challenged everything scientists thought they knew about bear cognition. The mother bear, now in her twilight years, had become a revered figure in the reserve. Young bears would often sit near her, as if absorbing wisdom from her mere presence. Michael noticed how she would sometimes gaze at the mountains with a look that seemed to hold all the memories of their shared journey. One crisp autumn day, as golden leaves fell around them, Michael received news that brought tears to his eyes. The International Union for Conservation of Nature had officially recognized the bears as a distinct species. The scientific name proposed honored both Sarah and the journey that had led to their discovery. Ursus sarahensis. "We did it, Sarah," Michael whispered, looking up at the sky. "Your love continues to change the world." The reserve's education programs expanded, reaching schools across the country. Children learned not just about bear conservation, but about the interconnectedness of all life. Michael's story, adapted into books and documentaries, inspired a new generation of conservationists and animal behaviorists. As the years passed, Michael began to feel the weight of time. His hair had turned silver and his steps were slower, but his eyes still sparkled with the same passion when he talked about the bears. He spent more time writing, compiling his years of observations and insights into what would become a seminal work on bear behavior and human-wildlife coexistence. Brave, too, was showing signs of age. His muzzle had grayed, and he moved with a deliberate slowness that commanded respect from the younger bears. Yet, his eyes remained as bright and inquisitive as ever. Michael often found him sitting on the same hill where they had shared that profound moment years ago, as if he too was reflecting on the journey they had taken together. On a quiet evening, as the sun painted the sky in hues of pink and gold, Michael made his way to that special hill. Brave was there, as if waiting for him. As Michael sat beside the great bear, a sense of completion washed over him. No words were needed. The connection between them transcended language. They sat together, man and bear, watching as the new generation of cubs played in the valley below. The sound of their joyful growls carried on the wind, a testament to the thriving community they had helped create. Michael realized that this moment, this partnership between species, this harmony with nature, was the culmination of everything Sarah had believed in. It was the embodiment of the love she had shared with him, a love that had expanded to encompass an entire ecosystem. As the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Michael felt a profound sense of peace. He had lived a life filled with purpose, had been part of something greater than himself, and had helped create a legacy that would continue long after he was gone. Brave gently nudged Michael's hand with his nose, a gesture of affection he had shown since he was a cub. Michael smiled, running his hand through the bear's thick fur. "Thank you, old friend," he said softly, "for everything." In that moment, surrounded by the beauty of the wilderness and the companionship of an unlikely friend, Michael knew that he had found the answer to the question that had driven him to the mountains all those years ago. Love, in its purest form, knew no boundaries. It could bridge the gap between species, heal the deepest wounds, and create miracles. As night fell, the reserve came alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures. Michael and Brave remained on the hill, two old friends sharing the peace of the moment. The story that had begun with loss and isolation had transformed into one of hope, renewal, and the enduring power of compassion. And so, under a canopy of stars, in a world where bears and humans had learned to coexist in harmony, Michael found the closure he had sought for so long. He realized that Sarah had never really left him. Her love had been the catalyst for this extraordinary journey, and it lived on in every bear that roamed free, in every person touched by their story, and in the very heart of the wilderness they had worked so hard to protect. As Michael prepared to leave the hill, Brave stood up with him as if to accompany him home one last time. Together they walked slowly down the path, their silhouettes merging with the shadows of the forest. It was a fitting image for a partnership that had defied expectations and changed the course of conservation history. Back in his cabin, Michael sat at his desk and opened his diary one last time. He began to write, his pen flowing across the page with renewed energy. "Dear Sarah, as I write these words, I am filled with a sense of wonder at the journey life has taken me on. What began as a retreat into solitude has blossomed into a testament to the power of love and connection. You always said that love was the greatest force in the universe, capable of bridging any divide. I see now how right you were. The love you shared with me didn't end with your passing. It transformed, finding new expression in the most unexpected of places. Through Brave and his family, through the countless lives touched by their story, your love continues to ripple outward, changing the world in ways we could never have imagined. I've learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting or moving on. It means growing around our grief, allowing it to shape us into something new and beautiful. The pain of losing you led me to this extraordinary adventure, and in saving these bears, I found a way to honor your memory and continue your legacy of love and compassion. As I look out at the reserve, teeming with life and possibility, I am filled with gratitude. Gratitude for the time we had together, for the lessons you taught me, and for the unexpected family I found in the wilderness. Brave, the curious cub who stole my heart, has become a symbol of hope and resilience. In his eyes I see a reflection of your spirit, that unwavering belief in the goodness of life and the importance of caring for all creatures. Our story, yours, mine, Brave's, and all the bears that now call this place home, will live on. It will continue to inspire, to teach, and to remind people of the profound connections that exist between all living things. As I near the end of my own journey, I am at peace. I have lived a life filled with purpose and love, bridging worlds and fostering understanding between species. And through it all, I have felt your presence, guiding me, encouraging me, loving me still. Thank you, my darling, for showing me the way. Your love has been my compass, leading me to this beautiful destination I could never have imagined. With all my love, now and always, Michael. As he closed the diary, Michael felt a sense of completion. He knew that whatever came next, the story he and Sarah had begun would continue. It would live on in the bears roaming free in the reserve, in the researchers dedicating their lives to understanding and protecting these magnificent creatures, and in every person who learned about their journey and was inspired to look at the world with more compassion and wonder. Michael stood up and walked to the window. The moon cast a soft glow over the landscape, and in the distance he could hear the low, contented growls of the bears. He smiled, feeling Sarah's presence more strongly than ever. "Good night, my love," he whispered to the stars. "Thank you for the greatest adventure of all." And with that, Michael turned away from the window, ready to face whatever new chapters life had in store, knowing that the love he and Sarah shared would continue to shape the world in beautiful and unexpected ways. As the years passed, the legacy of Michael, Sarah, and Brave continued to grow and evolve. The reserve became a model for conservation efforts worldwide, demonstrating the powerful results that could be achieved when human compassion and scientific understanding worked hand in hand. Brave's descendants, inheriting his unique intelligence and social skills, played crucial roles in maintaining the delicate balance of the ecosystem. Researchers marveled at how these bears passed down not just genetic traits, but complex social behaviors and problem-solving skills from one generation to the next. Michael's diary, published posthumously, became a bestseller and was translated into dozens of languages. It inspired a new wave of conservationists, wildlife biologists, and animal behaviorists who approached their work with a blend of scientific rigor and heartfelt compassion. The story of the man who found healing through saving a family of bears touched hearts around the world. It sparked a global conversation about the deep connections between humans and wildlife, challenging old paradigms and encouraging a more holistic approach to conservation. Educational programs based on Michael and Brave's story were implemented in schools worldwide, teaching children about empathy, ecological responsibility, and the importance of preserving biodiversity. Many of these children grew up to become passionate advocates for wildlife and environmental protection. As decades passed, the reserve expanded, connecting with other protected areas to create vast corridors of wilderness where bears and other wildlife could roam freely. The Ursus sarahensis population flourished, spreading to other suitable habitats and helping to restore ecological balance in areas where they had long been absent. Climate change brought new challenges, but the resilience and adaptability that Michael had observed in Brave and his family proved crucial in helping the bears navigate changing conditions. Scientists studied these adaptations, gaining valuable insights that helped in conservation efforts for other species facing similar challenges. On the 100th anniversary of Michael's arrival in the mountains, a special ceremony was held at the reserve. People from around the world gathered to celebrate the extraordinary legacy of love, science, and conservation that had grown from one man's grief and one bear's curiosity. At the ceremony, a statue was unveiled. Michael and Brave sitting side by side on their favorite hill, gazing out over the valley. The plaque beneath it read, "In memory of Michael and Sarah, and in honor of Brave, their love transcended species and transformed a wilderness, may their story continue to inspire generations to come to see the world with compassion, wonder, and hope." As the sun set on that day of celebration, casting a golden glow over the thriving reserve, a young bear cub, a distant descendant of Brave, curiously approached the statue. He sat down beside it, mirroring the pose of his ancient ancestor, and gazed out at the vast wilderness before him. In that moment, it seemed as if the spirits of Michael, Sarah, and Brave were present, their love and legacy living on in every tree, every animal, and every person touched by their extraordinary story. And so the tale of a man, a woman, and a bear, a story of loss, love, and unexpected connections, continued to unfold, reminding all who heard it that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to create something beautiful, to bridge divides, and to leave the world a little better than we found it. As the stars emerged in the clear night sky, their light seemed to whisper ancient promises of hope and renewal. The reserve, once a place of solitude and grief, now pulsed with life and possibility, a testament to the enduring power of love, compassion, and the unbreakable bonds between all living things. And somewhere, perhaps, Michael and Sarah walked hand in hand through celestial forests, with Brave padding softly beside them, their journey continuing in realms beyond human understanding, their love eternal, their story never truly ending.